So it's an honor to be here with members of our panel who were there in 1989, who experienced in different ways the fall of the Berlin Wall. So we're going to first hear from them their stories, 3 minutes apiece, so we have time to then follow up with questions and then have conversations that can involve all of us. So I'll let them introduce themselves as they tell their stories.
Hi, my name is Susanne Sutton, and I am a senior lecturer in the Department of Modern Languages, Linguistics, and Intercultural Communication in the German area. And I was 23 years old when the wall fell. I was a student in college, and I slept through the whole night. I just woke up to it. As my roommate said, you know what, the wall had fallen. And I just could not believe it, so don't take an example from the students. I ditched all my classes I had that day and just stayed home and watched television in disbelief because it was so fast and so surprising. I grew up in the shadow of the wall, about the inner German wall, I should say, about 30 miles from the East German border, and so there was no hinterland for us. The world ended there. And one of the stories I will never forget is the day I first went into East Germany after the wall had officially fallen. I had forgotten my passport and or couldn't find it, so we drove to the wall regardless. It was Christmas '89, and I thought, I'm not sure that I will get in. But so there we are at the border with these imposing border guards, and I said, you know, I forgot my passport, and he just shrugged and waved us through. And to this day, I will not forget the feeling of passing through no man's land, not having a visa, not having a passport. So that was a defining moment when I realized something monumental had happened and will continue to happen.
So again, my name is Romy Hübler. I'm the Assistant Director in the Center for Democracy and Civic Life. And I was 8 years old when the wall fell. I was on the other side. I was in Leipzig, which is where the peaceful revolution started. It's where people started to gather in the church and started to come together and speak out against, organize against the lack of freedom that we had. My parents dropped me off at my grandmother's house when the wall fell. I had no idea. I didn't really at this age know that there is a West Germany. I knew I had family that would send packages from somewhere for Christmas and Easter and birthdays, and that there was exciting chocolate in there and clothes, and that was that. And so the first time that I went to the West, that was also a very formative experience, and it was dark. We were in our little Trabant that you all saw, the East German car, and all I could see were brake lights. There was no one coming the other way. Everyone was going to the West. And that is still affecting me today when you are sitting there and you see everyone is leaving the place that you're from. And talking about the chocolate, the first West German who was not part of my family, who I interacted with, gave me one of those little surprise eggs, Kinder eggs that you might know in the stores, and the goal is to get a collectible. And I got a collectible in my first surprise egg. It was a little like garden gnome. And so my parents still have that, but that memory of just being in the car and there's excitement and you cross and you see like the inner German border and it's still fortified, right? Like it's a scary thing, and I remember my parents just saying, "Wow, those were the like death bolts, I guess," and yeah, and not quite understanding what's happening, but that image of just everyone is going one way.
Hi, I'm Ed Larkey. I'm in the Department of Modern Languages, Linguistics, and Intercultural Communication, and I've been there for quite a while. And I studied both in West Germany and East Germany, and I was in East Germany from 1978 to 1984. So when the wall came down, it was pretty clear for me that the situation was becoming really untenable for most of the population because the country was in a state of decline and goods were becoming scarce in a lot of the stores. The cities were deteriorating, the the building substance was deteriorating, and people were complaining quite a bit, and because they couldn't leave the country, things were getting a little bit desperate, and so when the wall actually did fall, of course it was a huge, huge surprise because everybody had just kind of assumed, no, it's just going to keep on going and deteriorate even further than it already had been, but then there was like a turning point that came, and there was a very big misunderstanding about what the political leadership had actually said that opened up the wall inadvertently. So when that happened, of course, and when it happened, hundreds of thousands of people converged on the wall. And one of the things that I had heard many years before was that if hundreds of thousands of people actually did go to the wall, that there would be no way that the border guards could ever do anything about it because they're not going to open fire on thousands and thousands of people. And that's actually what happened. It was quite astounding to see all these people. I was relatively privileged because I could always go to the West because I had an American passport. But many of my friends didn't. And it was really a very difficult communicative situation because when you do things that other people can't, they get jealous, and it really is not a very healthy situation. Before the wall came down, it's not like the wall was impermeable for many things. I mean, people heard Western rock music, they watched Western television, especially in many of the areas, except for Dresden, of course. Many of the areas, the Valley of the Clueless, I think they called it there, because Western television could not be, you could not get Western television reception there. But there were a lot of ways to get Western goods. Relatives brought over things. So the wall was not completely impermeable, and whereas the Easterners were very interested in what was going on in the West, the opposite was not the case. And the Westerners were not very interested in what was going on in the East, and really nothing changed for those in the West after the wall came down, except for the fact that many people moved to the West that could never move there before. So anyway, so that's all I have to say right now. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Marina Adler. I'm a professor in the Sociology department. And I was born on the western side of Germany, but the rest of my family was in the east, except for my parents. So the wall played an enormous role in my life because we knew we had our family on the other side, but you could not really talk to them on the phone because there was surveillance. You could not really write letters. There were things blacked out. I have a half-sister that grew up in East Germany. My parents fled right before the wall was completely closed. They went with just the clothes on their back and their educational certificates through Berlin right after they got married. And I was 32 when the wall came down. I was here in the United States in my last semester to get my PhD in College Park. And I remember saying, this isn't possible. This is a hoax. I don't believe it. Other people kept asking me, well, didn't you see this coming? You're a sociologist. I'm like, no. I was just totally, my mind was blown. And I was kind of stuck looking at the television myself as well. As a kind of an interesting story, my brother, who's a lot younger than me, climbed on top of the wall and was one of those young people that stood up there and banged and cracked and got the stones loose. And he brought, when he visited me in the US, he brought me a piece of the wall, and it's in my bookcase. And the reason why he did this was that there is a story. When I was 4 years old, I had to travel all by myself with a train across the border to see my grandparents for the first time. And my mother couldn't come with me because she was blacklisted because they fled. And I was terrified the whole time. Talk about childhood trauma. But I got there, well, I've never seen my grandparents before. It's not like we had Skype or something. And, but what happened was the conductor was supposed to watch me, and I had a sign around my neck, my name is Marina Adler, blah, blah, blah. And when the police came at the border, they have guns, machine guns, uniforms, and they make you empty out everything you have. And I got really upset because they were taking out all my stuffed animals out of my bag. And I apparently, and this is what the conductor told my grandparents, yelled at this man with the machine gun and told him that when I grow up, I'm going to come back, I'm going to take a hammer, and I'm going to break down the wall. And the conductor told that to my grandparents and actually told them that they may get a visit from higher up because this is like bad propaganda or something. Where did this come from? And so that's why my brother brought me a piece of the wall that he hammered out. And that was kind of a cool thing. And I did reunite with my half-sister. And actually the first winter the wall was open, the inner German border was open, my whole family, we walked across in the snow. That was very important to us. So, thank you.
So each of you had these really powerful experiences with the Berlin Wall as a physical barrier. I wonder for any of you, where else in your life have you encountered a Berlin Wall?
Okay, so I wouldn't be a good sociologist if I didn't know about walls. So in my work, which by the way, after the fall of the border shifted dramatically to looking at East German women and how they coped with reunification. That was, I published quite a few research articles on that because that was very close to my heart. But the walls that I know about are the walls between the wealthy and the rest of us, for example. They are ever present. If you turn on the television, there it is. The walls that are built by exclusion and racism, they are everywhere. And we have a lot of walls that are being built right now to keep people out or keep people in. I just have to tell you about the family separation that's happening at the border. Those are all walls, and walls cause trauma, as you can see. All of us are very much still affected by what happened in our lives because of a wall. And so I would argue that these walls that we see amongst all of us, immigrants, non-immigrants, the different people identify differently with different races and genders, and all of these walls cause harm. And so one of the things I guess we should be thinking about is how to get people out of their bubbles. That's sort of what I try to do in my classes, get people out of their comfort zone so that they kind of are more aware of these walls that we are kind of accepting, and that they need to kind of do something about those.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of walls in Baltimore, to tell you the truth. I mean, the city is really, I live in Baltimore City, and I think, you know, if you go from neighborhood to neighborhood, especially like around York Road and Guilford, there are definitely walls there. There are visible and invisible walls in the city that need to be let's say, made more porous, and people need to build bridges to different communities in the city and also outside of the city. It's still astonishing for me that I'm not particularly from Baltimore, but the fact that there's a Baltimore County and a Baltimore City that have really administratively nothing to do with each other is kind of ridiculous. Because everybody moves in and out of the city as if it's one administrative unit, and that's really something that it only shares with St. Louis. I don't know if that's really a great thing to say or not, but it certainly doesn't speak for trying to get to know people if you know, you build these kind of invisible walls between city and county and various constituencies inside the city. So that's my view.
Marina, you mentioned that you're still carrying the experience with you, and it sounds like that's true for each of you. So I wonder, for any of you, what is it that you're still carrying with you? What are the lessons? What are the feelings?
I can say I moved to the U.S. in 1997, January 1997, and I call my relationship to East Germany, if you will, a fossilized relationship. I immediately know if somebody's from the East, the way they talk, the way they act sometimes, and that definitely is a wall I haven't overcome. The wall is very much still in my head, and I think I would be lying if I said that I didn't have prejudices, I would say. I think anybody who says I'm not prejudiced is not being truthful to themselves.
So something that I carry is a belief that change happens, but that the actual tangible or structural change is not the end point. Because if we let go and believe that we have achieved what we set out to do at that point, there are so many other forces that are pushing against that are trying to undo what you have just achieved. And we see that in social movements throughout the ages, right? So change happens, but we need to continue to work together and make sure that what we actually fought for is going to be achieved and not like a rug being pulled out from under you. And when I go back home, I still see my family struggling. And I see cities and towns that are vacant, where you don't see people my age. And when I go home for the holidays, that's when my friends show up again, but they don't live there, right? So like there's a whole generation missing. And even the young people who are there now, they're going to the larger cities, they're going to the former West, which by the way we still say the West, or they're going abroad. And that is, it's devastating to go home and to know that this is your home, but there is no future there for you.
Well, I guess for me, when I think about the wall and when it was there and when it's gone, I feel a deep sadness for the loss. Not having grown up with my grandparents when I was young, not knowing my half-sister, not knowing the extended family for all these years. The minute the wall opened, of course, we're reconnected. But as everybody is saying, it's not the same. You still have that difference. People who grew up in the East were socialized differently than in the West, have different dialects, have different ways of looking at the world than in the West. And so there is this permanent invisible wall still there. I mean, we've made inroads, but the two sides are still very, very different. Economically, politically, we now see the rise of the AfD, the neo-Nazis, particularly in the eastern region. And sociologically, my explanation is that in the West, we had to do, as young people, a lot of work around our Nazi past. We learned in class very, very intensively what happened. We were confronted with it. We were told, this is unacceptable, never again kind of thing. In the East, not so much. The East, the idea was to look forward to what socialism was going to bring in the future and not to look back. And I think that is one of the key differences and why we're observing what we're seeing right now in the East.
Well, I think the East delegated its responsibility to so-called anti-fascism to the government, and the government always made a claim that it was an anti-fascist government and that neo-Nazism didn't have a place in the country. But as a matter of fact, under the surface, there were quite a few neo-Nazi and old Nazi attitudes that were persisting, that were ignored by the government. And these attitudes were exploited when it came time to move against the civil rights movement in the 1980s. Right, so a lot of times, a lot of the church groups that were protesting against the government were raided, and a lot of the skinhead activities were handled very gently, and so it was very convenient for the government to play the skinheads off against the more progressive people in the churches and the resistance movement. That's one of the legacies that we're seeing now, is that in the East, there's more of a tolerance, let's say, for neo-Nazis than in the West, even though there are neo-Nazi activities in the West as well.
Yeah, just to add onto that and going home and kind of having seen the progression and how even my parents are voting for Alternative for Germany, and that's hard to see, and yet I can also see why that is. And if you're for now 30 years feeling and are in many cases, in many ways, treated as a second-class citizen, right? Like you start to build up an anger and then steer that anger toward something that you perceive as different and a threat, and so that's that's how I have experienced that, just in looking at my own family.
1 minute. You don't know this, and I just remembered it. When I was at Kalamazoo College in Michigan, I befriended a Yale student, and she came to visit me and said, I have 2 Yale friends who are selling, this was in 1990, I think, who are selling Levi's jeans in Leipzig. So we went down there and we met these friends. They must have been like rich folk. They had a black Porsche, convertible Porsche. So we were driving through Leipzig, 1990, in a black convertible Porsche, young, cocky American boys, and my friend and I. No wonder that, this is just one example of carpetbagging, is that what you call it? That was happening also. So I'm still embarrassed for that moment.
Thank you. We're going to make this the last question. We need to have brief responses before we move into table discussions. But is there any moment that you've experienced since the fall of the wall that has evoked similar feelings that went along with the wall's demolition?
It actually happened when my grandparents opened up about their experiences with World War II and the expulsion, and their experiences moving from what is now Poland and the Czech Republic, and by moving, I mean forcibly being removed from their homes. So that's something that I always vaguely knew a little bit about, and I was always curious, why does my grandmother speak Polish, and why does my grandfather speak German with this accent that I had never heard? But we never talked about it, and it was when I was a student here at UMBC, and I started doing qualitative research and hearing about stories and storytelling as a way to do qualitative research. I asked them, and it was really like a wall coming down.
We'll close on that. Thank you to all of you. Those are powerful stories. I appreciate you sharing them. I'm going to call up Jasmine Lee, who's Director of Inclusive Excellence for UMBC's Division of Student Affairs, to start us off on table discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting sounds happening right in the middle.
Thank you, and thank you all so much for sharing your stories with us. So we just heard about 30 minutes worth of stories, both literal and figurative, the ways that they separate us, may keep us out of spaces or isolate us via the media or systemic oppression or literal borders between spaces. And so now what we want to do in a spirit of dialogue and kind of co-created learning between us, at your tables, we want you to spend some time in brief reflection, and I'll share those questions with you in just a second. Before I do that, I'm noticing that some tables have 4 people, some tables have 2. If you're at a table of 2, I bet you can guess what I'm going to ask you to do. Yes, which is find a table of 4. So if you're at a table of 2, if you can just combine with a table of 4 or more, so that you can engage in broader discussion, that will be helpful. So here are some of the questions that we're going to be asking you to think about. What comes to mind when you think of walls, right? So maybe some of the things that were already shared with us, but as folks were talking, maybe you were thinking about some of the walls that have shown up in some of your own lives. What is a wall that matters to you that you would like to see come down? Again, this can be literal or figurative. And what is something that connects you to people who are on the other side of the wall that you described? So think of some walls in your life, some walls you would like to see come down, and the ways that you might be connected with folks on the other side of those walls, even though the walls still might be present in our minds or physically in spaces. Are we all clear on what we're going to do next?
Yes.
Fantastic. Are the questions on the slide? I believe they are. I'm not sure if the clicker will work because of the video. Oh, they're not. That's okay, I'll repeat them. And I'll give you the shorter version so they're easier to remember. What comes to mind when you think of walls? I can't shorten that one. What comes to mind when you think of walls? The second one is, what is a wall that matters to you? And how are you connected to some people on the other side of these walls that you might be thinking about? All right, so we're thinking about connection, we're thinking about walls, and we're thinking about things that come to mind as we heard some of the dialogue so far. That is a good question.
We'll all talk together later.
Fantastic. So the question for those of you over there who perhaps didn't hear was, will there be questions of the panelists later? And the answer is that after we have some brief table discussion, we'll all come back together and large group talk.
Talking about walls, literal, figurative, what are some insights that emerged in your conversations? Who will share?
Hi. So I actually don't know who table this year because we were having really, I just put them in the spot. We were having a really good conversation, but for me personally, and like the way I grew up, the first thing that I thought of when it came to a wall was communication. Because I think of myself as a wall sometimes, where I put up a wall where I'm scared to communicate with somebody because I don't want to wear my heart on my sleeve. Because I'm like, if I wear my heart on my sleeve, what if someone takes advantage of that? So that's like one of the biggest walls that I face as a person. And the way I grew up, like we have to have this hard show, and like especially as a black woman, you have to be a strong black woman at all times. You can't cry. You have to keep pushing yourself. You have to go, 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 go. So communication-wise, it's hard for me to communicate with people and not have this go, go, go mentality. So when it came to like the biggest wall that I face as a person, it's communication and trying to give off like my bubbly personality and be this happy-go-lucky person that I know I am and that people around me know that I am, but conveying that to people and still being comfortable to convey that without feeling like I'm wearing my heart on my sleeve. So that was mine.
Okay. Hi guys, my name is Michelle. So I just want to talk about two things. So what I've seen and what I physically feel. So I've seen a lot of walls, like if you think about it, walls, if you put it together, it's a box and it's like a room. So when you're in a house and you have different walls, you're separated by these walls, like your family, or you could be in your own room and then your mom's in her own room and your brother's in their room, whatever. But you guys are separated by all these four walls, even though mentally you guys don't put walls up to each other, with each other. You guys are separated by these physical walls. But then if you sit in like when you're waiting for a doctor's appointment or something, everyone's sitting together in the same room within these four walls, but everyone's so isolated and talking to themselves. And they're just sitting and just like in their own space. And I think those are the mental walls we put up. So if we talk about mental walls, mentally for me, I put myself in a box sometimes, and I think that's the ego, and I'm surrendering to my ego because I understand that people see me as a certain way, and so I sometimes surrender myself to that and feel like I have to act a certain way. And also, like me having immigrant parents coming to America, I put myself in this box because I don't know, like I'm not white enough to be in America, but I'm not Asian enough to be in China, where my family is from. So it's like, who am I? At the same time, it's like this wall that I created myself because I know I can be whoever I need to be and whoever I want to be, you know? So yeah.
Hello. So one thing that just stood out to me when talking about walls in our society that we encounter is that walls are all man-made. And not only that, but they're a result of fear or insecurity or just someone, feeling a desire to cause a separation. And so since they are rooted so deeply, walls can't just be like torn down, on the surface, but we have to go in and uproot them from the source where they started from in order to really tear them down.
So I'm hearing about a lot of metaphorical walls and the idea that walls can be interpersonal and psychological and not just lining international borders. What other insights emerged for any of you? Themes at your tables?
Somebody over here.
So at our table, we kind of discussed this idea around things being a bit on a continuum and kind of discussing how we label things, but kind of questioning, is it inherently bad to label as much as it is to attach specific meaning to a thing? So I think at times we try to categorize because we want to understand or because we want to kind of keep things neatly in our brains, but the problem becomes when we attach something to that, we attach meaning or we make meaning out of something that could be a supposed label. So I can't think of a good example right now, but kind of questioning, like, is it the labels themselves that are bad, or is it more so what we attach as meaning to those things, right?
So we had a note taker, but my big hope when the wall fell, and I have lived in the US for 50 years, I came from Latin America, from Ecuador, was that basically the end of the Cold War was going to end all wars, and that this justification for arms and killing and calling people names like they called me many times a commie, in order to diminish you and justify persecuting you, and like many people were persecuted in Latin America because of their struggles to make a better country, that would end. The unfortunate thing is that a new type of war came under the guise of terrorism, and that they continued this justification of the production of arms, armaments, and people, warriors, for what purpose? Always to protect the interest of the well-to-do. So the biggest wall, from my perspective, is the wall that the world has continued to create in order to protect the well-to-do against the non-well-to-do, without understanding that the not well-to-do are the ones that are producing the wealth of the world. So that is the big challenge, I think, for us, especially those of us who live right here in the United States, to take down the walls that the US creates, preventing people from the US to travel to Cuba to see what Cuba is about, the wall that the US is trying to create between Mexico and the rest of Latin America to keep those bad hombres, like somebody said, to take those walls down, the wall that Israel continues to continue with in occupied territories and Palestine. We need to think in large terms. Yes, we have other walls. The walls are right here between Howard County and Baltimore and between, but it's always between the wealthy and the poor. It's in education, it's in healthcare, it's a system, it's a capitalist system from my perspective that is unsustainable, that we need to change. We need something different. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Millie Rivera, and I have a question for the panelists, if they're still around. I visited Germany 5 years ago, exactly, during the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the wall being taken down. And my first reaction was like, go to Germany, to Berlin to look at the wall, and it's like, you know, been bombarded by propaganda all my life. But I said, it's a special occasion. So I visited the Checkpoint Charlie, and because we were staying in East Germany, I visited the Stasi Museum. And I have a question for those of you who lived in East Germany. because I wonder if what I was told in the Stasi Museum this time was propaganda from the West, or if indeed this is the way it was. But what I recall, or the way I visualize this Germany from the tour, was that once the Russians took over East Germany, they were very concerned about having the West influence life in the East. And as one of you mentioned, the goal was to prove that socialism was great. But the Stasi, for those of you who don't know, was the secret police. And what I was told was, in the beginning, it was one or two people who belonged to the secret police. But by 1983, practically everybody in East Germany was part of the secret police, just to make sure that nobody ratted on me, because I would rat on the next door neighbor first. So everybody had dirt on everybody. And one of the things that I have been reading about is that until today, there are mountains of documents, of dirt, of data that have been saved about all these people who were ratting on each other. And you know, the concept of the wall is not the wall, just the Berlin Wall, but this wall that all of you in East Germany seem to have to build to protect yourselves from your neighbors. So I don't know, that was the story I brought home. I don't know if it's true or not, but I just wanted to say that I'm happy that the Stasi no longer exists. So
yeah, I support it.
It's a time to celebrate.
Someone want to answer
Romy,
the
you want to
question?
answer?
Well, yes.
You need a microphone.
East Germany. Maybe has
Yeah, okay, I take this question because I'm Larkey, and I'm Ed Larkey's wife, and so we lived together in East Berlin, and actually I lived there before. So yes, the Stasi was a big threat to everyone, but it was not the case that everyone ratted on everyone. So, and we just lived with it. We knew that if one had a telephone, that the telephone would have been bugged. We knew that letters would be checked and blacked out. We knew all of that. We knew you go to a student party and at least 3 of the people there, your friends, are spying for the Stasi. But that is basically what we lived with. So it was, on one level, it was a threat because ultimately it could become dangerous for professional advancement reasons, for instance. So the Stasi always had a separate file on pretty much everyone. So when they wanted to get a job at a university, that would not be possible without the Stasi's opinion to that. So yes, it was, surveillance was all around us, but we lived with it. And we kind of tried to find ways to scale the system. But of course, not everyone was successful in that. So some people who were outspoken in the opposition, they could not go to university, for instance, or they could not do certain things. So it really depended on where people stood. But the majority, the absolute majority, just, I think, went along with the system. And they didn't have much to hide, and they also were not that afraid. But if one was outside the system and outside the ideology, then it could become a problem. And of course, there also were political prisoners in East Germany. So nowadays, some of those prisons are now quote-unquote tourist attractions. And that is, I think, one other aspect, that one could get sent to jail for much less than anyone other political dissenters in the world. So sometimes it was just a symbol, like a white flower in the window that would say, I'm in solidarity with those who want to leave the country, and you could get jailed for that. Or fabricated stories on people who wanted to leave East Germany, you could get jailed for that. But again, that really, we have to keep that in mind. This was not the whole population. So the majority of the population lived, I would say, primarily without having run-ins with the Stasi on a daily level. But again, if you were a dissenter, you had more than daily run-ins, or you could have more than daily run-ins with them.
Thank you.
Time for one more sharing out of insights, if anybody would like to. Okay, well, we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank you all for participating, both being here for the panel and participating in the table conversations. Romy and I work for UMBC's Center for Democracy and Civic Life. There are 4 ideas that are behind everything that we do. They appear on your tables in the form of those round stickers. Civic life is everywhere, so that we have more power than we think we do. People want to matter and belong. Stories are everything, and change happens. Walls can fall. I think a part of what we exist to do is to help people tear down walls here at UMBC and beyond. So if there's one of those stickers that stands out to you as a good memento of the conversation that you had tonight, feel free to take it. And I want to highlight on the screen, you'll see there's a link to a place you can go to see the collection of digital stories. They're not all up yet, but the story that we saw tonight was a compilation from interviews that were done, and eventually all of the interviews will be up as their own stories, and you can go and see about people's experiences, people from Baltimore, people from UMBC, their experiences with the Berlin Wall and its fall. Thank you all for being here. Have a good night.
Nope, it's recording. Nope, it's recording.